Hey folks, I'm Adam Davis. Welcome to On Air episode 60. Last week David was in the Big Apple where he was joined by the CEO of Mantle, Nathaniel Harley. Together they discussed community and regional banks in the US and how technology can support this industry. Very, very insightful episode, and they obviously talked about what tech can do and what is happening at the moment, so go ahead and check it out on FinTech Insider Twitter account and the 11FS YouTube channel. This week I'm joined by a familiar face, my colleague Simon Taylor. How are you doing, Si?
I am A-OK, my friend. How are you?
I'm not too bad.
Yeah.
We haven't just run out of guests. There is a rhyme and a reason for this. A few weeks ago, 11FS released a report called How to Build a Bank. The report is a definitive guide to navigating a complicated market and creating truly digital propositions. If you haven't read the report, then this is pretty much the first page.
Oh, God.
It's like you've been airbrushed.
Yeah, no, they improved me dramatically. I look all hopeful and kind of like, yes, look, you can build a bank.
You look meaningful, man. You look like you've got things on your mind, which is good because we're going to delve into them now. Today, Simon obviously is going to talk to you why he wrote the report, what the problem he saw, anything that needed addressing, etc., etc. So we'll get all into that in a sec. I think the first thing really to start off with is elevator pitch for the report, because we've had a lot of inbound, had a lot of interest into it. So I guess at our highest of high levels, what's the elevator pitch?
Yeah, so depending on who you are, I guess it changes a little bit. But we get a lot of people coming after us and going, can I build a bank? How do I do it? And so it just felt logical to write it all down and put it in one place. And what's really interesting in the last 3 or 4 years is we've seen big banks do their own challenger brands. We've seen Metal and Bow from RBS, but we've seen Marcus by Goldman, we've seen Finn by Chase, we've seen varying degrees of success there. But you've also seen the big techs come into the space. You've also seen other companies maybe do things in the telco sector for quite some time.
Yep.
And fundamentally, the cost of getting into the market because of some of the new suppliers that are out there has come way, way down.
Yes.
The long-term sort of regulatory environment has really changed post-financial crisis.
Yep.
So there's just more ability to do it than ever. But what do you do and how do you get started?
Yep. Okay, cool. So this is a report. It covers a lot of sections. We can go into the contents in a sec. But who is it predominantly aimed at? So if you your super user picks up the Build Your Bank guide, who is it?
So I think I actually had 3 different audiences in mind. The first one was obviously incumbent banks, right? I mean, they're the ones probably thinking maybe I want to enter a new market and I want to think about, well, how do I enter a new market and do something a little bit different to the way I would have done it historically?
Yeah.
The second one is any brand. This could be anybody you've heard of in the high street. This could be everybody from your big techs to energy companies to anybody who has a lot of customers and a lot of users who's looking for another way to monetize those users. And the third one was 2-3 people with an idea who might want to see, is there a playbook that we can learn from, yes, how the challengers have done it, but also from our experience of having been through it several times now.
So there's a lot of people that probably watching this thinking that sounds like mental, like 2-3 people can have an idea to build a bank and actually get it done. The reason for that, you mentioned it before, cost to actually build one of these things has come down quite dramatically, which means you're seeing, I guess, a lot more banks, if you like, certainly financial services companies tiered towards niches, which is great because it means you can solve more customer problems. Client comes to you tomorrow. We get this all the time, by the way, so this isn't a new question. But client comes to you tomorrow and goes, "How much does it take? How much does it cost to build a bank?"
Yeah.
What are you saying, man?
Yeah. Well, I think the thing we always say is, Tom Blumfeld, when he came on the podcast, talked about it's probably cost about 100 million to get Monzo to where it is today. But that's not the question you're really asking me. The first question is, what will it actually take to get started?
Yeah.
And we like to. I think actually the way startups have done it historically makes a lot of sense. If you think about how startups are funded, you don't sort of walk in off the street to a VC's office and they go, here's 300 million. I mean, unless you've Elon Musk, that very rarely happens. So what is the thing that you do to get started? Typically, you have a small bit of capital, a seed round, they tend to call it. And in that seed round, what are you trying to prove? Are you trying to prove that you could build a sort of industrialized, multi-geography bank for everybody, from the biggest corporates to the consumer? No. what you're trying to prove with that initial capital is, would anybody care if we built this thing? Which is kind of the opposite to how big banks do it. Big banks start at like, where do I want to be in 5 years' time, and how much is it going to cost to get there? And then this certainty of a plan that looks really, really certain. And so we have to spend $500 million, $1 billion to build this thing. How do you de-risk that investment? And I think VCs have shown us the way to do it.
What is the way to do it?
By starting with an A round, maybe it starts with, I mean, what does an A round look like? Anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million US.
Yep.
You then have a short shelf life. You have a small window of time for this thing to prove itself. So I'm always referencing what Sam Altman, who was the founder of Y Combinator, said, which is there's two things that you should do in the early life of any company. One is talk to customers. The other thing is write code. And we kind of took from that and take a little bit of that and take a little bit of design agency Double Diamond.
Yeah.
And what we've put together, I think, is a standard process now. It's fairly standard. It's always a little bit different. Of how do you take this ignition capital, get in front of customers, identify where the niches are in the market that are most underserved, where customers are underserved and overcharged. And then once you've done that, what are the things that you could build? And then build a little bit of prototype, build a bit of demo. But also, who are the suppliers out there? Like in the US, a Plaid and a Marqeta, like a GPS here in the UK, or a PPS or a Wirecard, and there's many, many others, TrueLayer, OpenWorks, you name them. Who are those suppliers that allow you to very quickly build just enough working tech to prove that a customer would want this thing, that then you can go show that to investors and go, well, actually, we had 50 beta customers or potential alpha customers look at this thing and say, yeah, they want to work with it. Here's the pitch, and here's why I need 2 to 10 million to do the next phase. So it looks a lot like a startup approach.
And I guess, again, every question that I'm basically asking you today, by the way, is questions that we get asked constantly by clients. So this be the repertoire that we literally just put out every time another client comes in to ask us for the same thing. You've said you could start with 500,000, £1 million, £2 million. How many people do you need in order to get to that point where you've got a product which is being tested with customers, not necessarily built, but in the position where you feel confident enough to showcase it to the world? So
we always talk about digital being a small team sport. And small team sports tend to be, at the earliest stage, you get team sports down to about 5 people, and you get them up to about 11 people. Hence, that's one of the reasons for the name of the company, by the way, wink, wink, is like this digital is a small team sport.
Sure.
And depending on how many people are already at our client, depending on how many people that we think this thing needs at this point in time, it could be anywhere between that 5 and 11. Somewhere in the middle of that is probably the sweet spot towards the end. And at the beginning, it might just be as simple as 2 or 3 people going out and speaking to customers who've done some of this stuff before, working directly. So it really does ramp throughout that sort of initial 12 to 16 weeks, whatever it is.
And I guess one of again, if you say it's going to cost you £2 million, well, $500,000, let's take the bottom end of that estimate. It's going to take you £500,000 with potentially 8 people to build a product which looks like a bank and is on its road to becoming a bank and showcase it to the market. In your mind, that's a model that if you presented that to, I guess, an incumbent bank, a big bank, they might look at that and think that's just not possible. Is it easier to do this with an incumbent bank who have got their mind set on it, or a bunch of sort of, startup nerds, I guess? What's the easier route?
I don't think there's one answer to that. It depends on who they are. There are some incumbent banks who've been phenomenal to work with, frankly, and they just want to work that way, and they absolutely get it. So it's really who's across the table from you. And then there are some nerds that were so nerdy that they were just like, no. So it really does vary. It really depends. And so the key quality you're looking for is, do they know their strengths and do they know what their gaps are? And if the answer to that is yes, then how do we collaborate to fill those gaps with the best of what we've got and the best of what you've got? And I think that's kind of the key. Yeah,
and it's nice because we're doing, at the moment, we've got 2 bank builds going on at the minute, one in the US, one in the Middle East. Very much both ends of the spectrum. So you've kind of got big bank and you've got startup as well. Not necessarily, once we've, I guess, put in the methodology and you sort of, you've run them through the way that we build, it is relatively similar in terms of the way that we're going to market. 2 completely different geographies, obviously, and the influences on the product as such. I suppose from your perspective, is there, is building a bank becoming something which is a very general methodology that you can roll out across the world, or is this, because if you look at the process that we're doing in the States, you look in the Middle East, you look at the stuff we've done in the UK, it's all following quite a similar rhyme or reason. Is that the same everywhere?
Well, I'd say it is for us. And we do it because we've seen it work many, many times. But if I look at Marcus by Goldman, that looks a lot more like the traditional ING direct model. It spends a lot more money and it focuses much more on price and rate and mass affluent than it does on the lower cost tech that solves for a niche. And not that that approach is wrong, it just requires a lot more capital up front, which if you have that capital, it is not wrong. And indeed, we are now starting to see hybrid approaches where people are looking for a payback over 2 to 3 years, and they can benefit from the supplier stack that we would typically go to and have worked with many times before, but also the business model where rate and or savings and lending is more the core of what they do than solving for everyday spend or solving for foreign exchange or solving for some of these other hyper niches that we've started to see. And I think you were quite close to the US bank build that we did. There's a model there where there were 1 or 2 individuals that were extremely close and then the board was quite close. What do you think worked about that US bank build?
I think for us it's, culturally, it's very, very important that whatever entity or sub-entity, if you like, you're working at from the client side are extremely invested into this. So one of the things I'd always say, and I tip my hat off to the clients in the States, they're probably watching this so they'll know who they are, is that they were all in from an investment perspective, a personal investment, aside from obviously monetary investment. So if this thing doesn't work, it's their jobs are on the line. And the differentiation of commitment between those who put themselves all out there and are willing to stake their hat on a thing, rather than those who are at a bank who do this, but if it fails, it's like kind of not the end of the world, is vast, because you get a lot more passion, and you get a lot more decisions that are based for the good of the product rather than the good of one's career. And I think that differentiation has been stark for me.
That's huge, isn't it? And I guess in contrast to well, not in contrast, but the other model to that of sort of 1 or 2 folks that are really leading, and then my understanding of the US bank, that the client that's there, is that they created a new legal entity so that they could have some logical separation from a governance perspective. But the one we're working with in the Middle East actually just went, actually, no, this is a new division of our organization. So there's 2 routes there to manage your, like if you are an incumbent bank, you've got a lot of regulatory responsibility. A lot of that comes kind of with the neighborhood. So you've kind of got to find a way to manage that. And there's no obvious answer. There's no one answer to that question that's better. Do I create a new company, or is it just a department off to the side? It's really about that culture point that you make. It can succeed either way if you get the culture right.
And we say a lot of the time, in fact, I'll ask you this question, but I'll give my view on it first.
Don't leave the witness.
Yeah, in the way that I do. But the one thing that we always emphasise with clients is that pace is critical. So if you build something, you need to test quickly, because there's no point in just spending dollars which are actually just going to go effectively down the toilet if customers aren't engaged in what you're doing. So you've got to build with pace. If from your, I've just kind of given you the answer, but I suppose from your perspective and what you've experienced, is pace the number one thing, or is there a multitude of factors?
Yeah, I think it's what creates that pace. Like what's the rabid dog that's chasing you. And if you are 2 people with an idea that's got some seed funding, it's when's the money going to run out? And we have a lot of sympathy for this as one of the original founders of 11FS, but David and Jason and Ross as well, and even when Megan was with us at the beginning, we felt that. We absolutely felt that, like, when the money's gone, we're gone. And that's not something you get in big bank program. In big bank program, with hundreds of people and billions in budget, it's much more about the politics versus the coalface of, like, the decisions you make when there's only so much money are very different to the decisions you make when you're trying to manage, like, what strategic initiative am I aligned to?
Yes.
This needs the autonomy to be able to execute at pace, and creating that autonomy is absolutely crucial. And sometimes that might be the case of making it look a bit more like innovation theatre. It might be this thing that's off to the side, because if there are too many hands in it early on, then it's impossible to have that pace just from organizational scale. Even if those people are extremely talented, extremely helpful, you've got to trust those few people over there to figure it out by themselves or not. And then by de-risking it from an investment perspective, they either will or they won't, but you're going to learn, and that's the downside. And the upside is maybe you end up with a brand or a proposition that's really exciting, and potentially some platforms that sit underneath that really are sort of completely different from a cost-income ratio standpoint, which is what we see in a lot of the traditional banking clients as a motivation.
Oh, dude, you just mentioned cost income. I got to go there.
Okay.
Typical, and we talk about it quite a lot on various different channels that we're on. We talk about cost income ratio being a really, really important fundamental part of how a bank's performing. To give the viewers, I guess, or listeners, some kind of idea in terms of what a good CI ratio is versus a not very good CI ratio. What are the levels that we're talking here?
So I guess in the UK, the last annual reports of Lloyds Banking Group, I think it was nearly 50%.
Yes.
I think Barclays were up somewhere 55%, something like that, 54. RBS was somewhere similar. So that's what you see with the really big banks. And then an Oak North would have something like a 35 to 30% cost income ratio. What does that mean? Well, if I've got a 50% cost income ratio, for every sort of £10 I make, £5 is profit. If I've got a 30% cost income ratio, for every £10 I make, £7 is profit. So that's why I want a good cost income ratio.
Your maths are good.
I had to keep it really basic there. Like when you diss numeric, I was taking my life into my own hands.
It's all good. You've passed. I hope he's passed. I think he's passed.
But if you look at where a lot of banks are strategically, can they afford to grow their top line revenues? Well, no, a lot of that's actually hamstrung. The markets they're in, they probably have, especially the really big banks, they have a certain penetration of that market. Are they going to get more or less on their existing infrastructure? Or do they need a way to think about what a different cost income model could be over the longer term?
Yeah.
And actually having this as sort of a live experiment, but giving it the task of washing its own face as a business case over time and building a business is really, really interesting and compelling. And if it doesn't work, you learned. And if it does work, then actually you potentially have a strategic platform for the future at a different cost income ratio.
And I think that's the key, isn't it? If you look at the all the banks' earnings reports that have just come out, a lot of it's around operational cost reduction. Trying to cut the hundreds of millions out of the cost of serving consumers. And the interesting thing is now is that if I'm a big bank and I could have my cake and eat it, I would have a new platform with X cost income ratio, which is lower, or which would generate a cost income ratio lower than, let's say, 30%. But then I'd have like this big migration of all my customers, maybe hiking them up from an active perspective, but putting them all in on this new platform. Does that come up in conversation as in, we can build it like this, we can kind of scale it like that, but ultimately I don't actually need any new customers. All I need is my existing customers moved over. And what's our answer to that?
Well, I guess it depends. I'd be interested in yours, but I mean, digital transformation is something you just have to do anyway. The market is still moving around you. The value of reducing the cost and improving the efficiency of your existing infrastructure is something you need to do just to stand still.
Yeah.
Never mind gain market share, never mind. Like, all of your competitors are already doing that. So what are you doing to get a competitive edge, I think is question number one. And question number two is, like, would you expect a 6-month-old child to be passing their exams at university?
Nice.
Like, don't lump all of those customers on a 6-month-old. Don't lump all of those customers on an 18-month-old. Like, you need to be patient with the thing. And do you have a mandate from the board and strategic priority that we are going to let this thing breathe, that we're going to let it grow? It's going to be expected to pay its own way. We're going to de-risk that investment. But if it earns its way, much like, I guess, a teenager paying its board, like, the thing has to prove itself as it goes. And absolutely be really ruthless and commercial about its success, but measure it like a new business, not an existing business.
Cool.
And then think about, okay, it's 4 years old, it's 5 years old. What are the other things I can launch alongside that? And then, is some of my existing customer book, can it use that platform? You get those questions later. But I think a lot of people want the answer to everything now and they don't want to wait for Christmas. But actually, half of the fun of Christmas is waiting for the damn thing.
It's a good point. I think and actually, if you look at quite a lot of the time, what you get with a Nouveau platform and Nouveau proposition is actually feature parity, and if not better features than what you've got from an existing perspective. So actually you've kind of got this motivation for consumers, and certainly this is what I've found, is that consumers will look at the new things, oh, that's really cool, I want a part of that.
Yeah.
Is there an easy way just to move over there? If you're doing like term deposits and savings, all sorts of stuff, there probably is, but obviously if it's a transactional account, it's a little bit different. But it is kind of interesting from a feature parity perspective that there's actually, if you can use the this is what I found, when you can use the motivation of almost a better customer experience to lure customers over, there is obviously a phased way you can do that, but the incentive is there for the consumer, not just from the bank.
Yeah, and if I have a better cost income ratio, the economics I can offer in my products are better, or the profit I can get from those products is better.
Exactly.
So there's a rationale for why you do it and how you do it. And people often worry about having the two systems side by side, and doesn't that duplicate my cost? And it does if they both cost billions and have to support millions of customers.
Yes.
But if one of them costs a fraction of that and can support a few thousand customers, and it can grow later, then you start to change the conversation. And I think we saw lots of either big bang migrations go very, very wrong. And I think part of that, with the classic example, not to pick on these guys, was TSB, but there was also Williams and Glyn.
Yep.
There are many of these where people have gone through that experience of trying to turn this one platform and big bang switch to the other. And I think history has proven that just doesn't work. Or if it does, it's incredibly rare. Whereas actually standing something up slowly makes a lot more sense. And then think about what this other platform gives you over time as well. It's not just the feature parity with the challenger banks, which you could probably build into on top of your existing stack.
Yeah.
It's the ability to keep up with those challenger banks, because you ship a new feature in 9 months. Challenger Bank can probably ship the same feature in a few days if they have everything, and assuming compliance allows and there are no governance reasons why they couldn't. In fact, possibly shorter. I think Simon Vance Collina, when he was at Monzo, talked on the podcast once about shipping code at least 40 times a day, and that continuous integration, continuous deployment.
Yep.
If you work in a bank in tech, I know you already want to get there, but you're hamstrung by all of the constraints that come from all of the legacy culture, process, and technology. Actually, sometimes it is quicker and easier to start again. That doesn't mean the people that work in the old organization are not of course they're capable. They absolutely are. This is about just giving it enough space to grow to a point where this expertise can be really valuable for it.
Cool. Changing tack slightly. A consortium comes to you, an incumbent from overseas comes to you and says, I want to build a new bank in the UK. So we're focusing UK specific just for a sec. What would your answer be to that right now? They've read the report, they love it, they love your picture. Yeah. just for the cameras.
Then I'd immediately worry. They're just like, why did you love the picture? What's wrong with you?
What's kind of the, from where we are right now, I guess virus aside, but general economics, macroeconomics, would you advocate bringing an FS proposition to the UK?
Yeah, I guess it depends what the proposition is, and I guess do they think they know what that is, or do they have a view as to what that is? Because the UK is now a very competitive fintech market.
It is.
It's also a great place to build a fintech.
It is.
And probably why it's a competitive fintech market. So yes, in the sense that it's probably the best place on earth from a regulatory perspective and from a proven supplier perspective to be able to get that done, and from a talent perspective. So yes, that all of the things that made it a great fintech hub are still true. But what becomes really, really important is why this proposition and why now. And we can help with some of that. We can certainly get out with customers and start to look for the most underserved and overcharged sections of society. And indeed, Ryan Garner and the research team are like chomping at the bit. There's a million things that we found that are just absolutely missing for the market. Hence, 1% finished. Like, the reason we say that is because everybody thinks it's done. There's so much more to do.
Sure.
There just is. But doing a Monzo or doing a Starling or doing a Revolut, I don't know that that's the right answer.
But it ties back to what you said at the beginning of the show, which is the cost of, I suppose, the barrier to entry, the cost of entering an FS market has come down so much that you can pick your niche. And if you pick your niche well enough and it can scale to a certain perspective, I've always said that there's 3 types of ways that you can create a bank. You can do it sort of that mass market, I guess, mass adoption, Monzo Starling type transaction account. You can do something which focuses on a niche, much like Revolut did with their FX conversions, and they started in Ireland and other places, to make sure that they've cornered a certain segment of the market. And then you've kind of got the Oak North model where you actually, you go for more, traditional financial services products. You take those three right now, and there's maybe n others as the costs, as the costs come down. Again, a question we get asked is, what's the right model to make money?
Yeah.
How are we making money?
So we always talk about what's your beachhead? Like, what's that first thing you do? And often the first thing you do might not be the thing that you do second, third, and fourth, and it might not be the thing that makes money. And so the question back is, when do you want to make money by? Like, what's your return period? And a lot of people say 1 year, and it's like, well, good luck there. But if it's 3 years, then perhaps something more towards the Oak North model makes sense. Or if you really can find a hyper niche that's massively underserved and you've got a charging model, let's go test that. But I think the universal model, the Monzo Starling model, does take a bit longer and it takes a bit more capital. And it really does depend. Maybe you've got a private equity firm behind you that is willing to put in sort of value into the balance sheet that can help you lend at a discounted rate.
Yep.
And there's no right answer. It really depends what's your payback time horizon and why are you doing this. Some people look at the UK market as being, actually, we really want to build this because we think from a sustainability and impact perspective, if we can bring people closer to their finances, then we could make a real difference for our ESG goals as an investor. So it really does depend. There's no right answer. I think that payback period is key. But I guess, what do you think the right beachhead is?
Oh man, now you put me on the spot. There's many, I suppose, at the moment that you could look at. I agree with you from a UK perspective. We are super saturated from a transactional account perspective. But I think I think a consumer will still be, and what we've proved from our research, a consumer is still open to a transactional account, which reinforces their beliefs. And a lot of the propositions that we're currently doing have a cultural, ethical overlay on it. And that is, I think, we've gone past the point 2014, 15, 16 when you saw a lot of the challengers come into the market, and they were concentrating quite a lot on just changing financial services because the economics didn't work for the consumer. So it was kind of I suppose, an overarching macro goal. And I think, to a degree, we've kind of achieved it. We haven't gone through the first 7-year cycle, but I think there's a definite playbook now if you want something different. And now I think it's a case of not just having something different, but that's kind of the same, but different economics, different engagement models. Now it's about actually, because it reinforced my beliefs as a person. And I think that, given the fact that the niches and barriers to entries are coming down, I think we're going to see a lot more specific and niche propositions in the market.
That's super interesting because I have a hypothesis, and I'd love your views on this, that you see Occupy Wall Street, post-financial crisis, and then sort of 5 years later you see challenger banks. They're not the same people, but like at the highest level. Now we've got Extinction Rebellion, and what's the fintech, the financial services sort of equivalent of that look like? I think that's an interesting space to play with.
You apparently use Monzo on the majority.
Yes, indeed. And so there is a natural alignment there that we'll maybe see. It's interesting in the UK as well, you saw retail has really been sort of a mass market retail, but then it's gone into the other products like specialist lending, specialist mortgages with Habito and Trussell, specialist savings like Plum. So they're really going deep into the product stack and reaggregating what's happening there. Then maybe in the SME space, sort of that, but 3 years late. And then what comes after the SME space is the small corporate or the growth entrepreneur type of sector that everybody seems to be going after in the UK at the moment. Then what comes after that? So there's a little bit of like, where do you want to be on that growth spectrum? How saturated is it? And the further you go up to the like the size of the customer you serve, the more you need to understand those customers or have kind of some depth with them, I think. It's good to have some intentional naivety, that's useful, but their problems do start to get quite specific as you get further up that space. So, and whereas in the US, perhaps they're further ahead on the wealth space. They have some stuff in the retail space, but have we seen that SME challenger bank in the US?
Cool. I'm going to do a pop quiz for you.
Pop quiz, bring it.
Running through the context of the contents of the Build the Bank report, we talk about getting started, alpha, betas, scaling, all sorts of stuff. So there's a sort of a set methodology we go through. Definition of an alpha, for those not in the know?
For me, and I'd love your definition of it, is the first working version of a product that might not have thought of every error and unhappy path, but it's a working happy path version of a product that's feature complete in the first MVP.
Whoa. I'd go pre-alpha.
Yeah.
We're like nerding out now.
Yeah,
I'd kind of do pre-alpha. So I think pre-alpha, friends and family is like not feature complete by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah,
but
MVP
almost.
complete.
Yeah,
MLP.
Then we got alpha, beta. What happens with beta? So when do you feel like from an alpha you're ready to go into this thing called a beta?
So to me, a beta is that sort of closed group of the first 100 to 1,000 users, depending on who you want to be, who are bought into kind of giving you the product feedback, and know that they're dealing with something that's early, and you're building kind of a wait list that goes onto that. I think what gives you confidence really depends on the level of comfort you need as an organization. There's going to be a bunch of stuff. Yes, there's the obvious alpha testing that goes into it. There's elements of governance and sign-off and all of the things that come with financial services, and ticks in boxes about am I compliant and am I comfortable with that, or do I have the appropriate risk and control and governance frameworks in place. And then I think the third thing is, do I know what I'm actually trying to learn from this beta and what my entry and exit criteria look like? Those would be the big ones. I don't know if you add to that list.
No, I don't. I think that's I think risk appetite. And managing your potential RWAs and the capital, all that sort of stuff, the capital requirements part, that's the bit that the risk guys get involved in, and that can make or break pretty much the proposition. Just as a note, I think when you're at alpha, what you said before about having a team of sort of 10, 12, 20, maybe alpha, 25-ish, when you get to beta, you've got to start bringing in the customer service agents, so your team would scale from sort of that level to like, maybe the 50-ish. And then I think you're looking at kind of, I guess, or certainly my experience anyway, sort of a 70-30 ratio between, if you've started to actually scale the bank and you've got a lot of customers, between customer service and technical service agents, between those who are actually building the proposition.
Well, and customer service is an interesting one because what level of customer service at what time, and how concierge is that customer service versus how automated is it, and how involved are the people that are there in the early days of building out some of that customer service capability? Because I love the phrase Jason uses, and it's now getting adopted, I think, more broadly in the industry, and I don't know if he originated or if it came from somewhere else, but you've heard of DevOps. Well, what about BizOps? How does the business run and manage its own environment? And those people should not just be reading a call center script that you've built for just that app. Those should be people who are empowered to actually change the app and work directly with engineers. And vice versa, the engineers or some of the technical folks should be as close to the customer at that formative stage of the platform as they feel comfortable and can reasonably be achieved. Yeah,
it's a good call. We've got we do a standard, a mass rotation on support. No matter what role you are in the bank, you are always on customer support rotation, which is kind of fun. In an ideal world, they won't be busy at all because everything will be working harmoniously. But in pre-alpha, that doesn't happen. But anyway.
but as you would expect for a toddler to fall over a lot. But look how quick it's learning. And I think there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, pre-alpha and alpha are a different beast to beta and beyond. Summing up, 3 key things to think about. So if I'm going to take 3 things out of the report, which is really nicely presented, actually, I like it.
Shout out to the media guys. I just read the words and then they made it look awesome.
Yeah, we've got some awesome stuff going on. But I suppose 3 high-level summary points. Like if, again, someone comes to you and says, we want to build the bank, we've read the report, what's the key pertinent things that we need to think about? What would you say?
It doesn't have to cost billions, number one. There's a process. We've done it before. We'd love to work with you. bit.ly/how to build a bank to find out more.
I think you've taken my bit. You've taken my bit, man. Awesome. Anything else I'm missing?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground, but I'm sure we could nerd out about this one forever. There's no right answers with this stuff. Ultimately, it depends on who you are and what you want to achieve. And a lot of this is about, let's have a chat. Reach out to me, simon@11fs.com. Let's have a chat about it. Like, why would you want to do it? What's your underlying motivation? Because if we can understand that, then we can figure out of all of this, what should you be doing?
Okay, cool. So I've just said where we can reach out to you. bit.ly/how to build a bank is where you can find the report. You can find me at AdamD8 on Twitter, or Adam@11fs.com. Almost forgot my email address there. But
wow, that was pretty touch and go.
I don't normally on the podcast shout it out, but anyway. And thanks so much for tuning in. If you want more insights, please listen to FinTech Insider podcast. I know loads of you do. Keep listening. If you want a topic discussed on air, hit us up on podcasts@11fs.com or tweet us at FinTech Insiders. I've just thrown all sorts of handles at you, so hopefully that all made sense. In the meantime, we'll see you next week.
Bye for now.
Goodbye for now.